Edition of the Ad Podcast. Sorry for the lack of shows over the last couple of weeks. We have been on the road, but taping a bunch of really cool things that you will get to see shortly. But we've got an amazing guest for you guys today. I think this is going to be a really fun interview. James Nord is the founder and CEO of Fohr, the first influencer ambassador marketing agency and platform in the US, launched in 2012 in New York City. A true pioneer in the creator economy, he transitioned from Wall Street finance to fashion photography, shooting behind the scenes for Oscar de la Renta and Thom Browne. After gaining massive fame as one of Tumblr's most followed creators and frustrated by the lack of structured ways to create connections for creators and brands, he built Fohr to bridge that gap, focusing on authentic partnerships, genuine passion over vanity metrics, and programs like Sephora Squad, with the motto, "Don't spend good money on fake love." He's paid out over $150 million to influencers, created category-defining tech, and grown Fohr into a full-service agency emphasizing a people-first culture. James also hosts a podcast, Negronis with Nord, sharing influencer strategy and tips. And he's a Forbes Agency Council member and an avid cyclist, racing for teams like Rapha, FohrTrek, and riding specialized bikes. From Atlanta roots to New York City, he loves helping people turn their wildest dreams into reality. James Nord, thank you, sir. Appreciate you coming on, man.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for the lovely intro. It's great to be here.
Let's go. Awesome, man. Well, I know I gave people a little bit of the cliff notes there, but I always like to start with a bit of an origin story. So you've had a varied career and made a couple of pivots and ended up to where you are today. But would love to hear it kind of from your perspective. You know, where'd you grow up? What'd you study?
Yeah.
And you know, how'd you get into this space in the beginning?
Yeah. So I was born in Queens, so I get to claim, like, you know, real New Yorker status. But but like 9 months in, I moved to Georgia. So I grew up mostly in Georgia, and eventually made it back up north for college. I went to Dickinson. I studied marketing with actually photography minor, and well, not marketing, sorry, business, international business. And came to New York. There were not a lot of jobs. Like the financial crisis was like preheating. It was like starting to cook up, and I ended up on Wall Street making 225 phone calls a day. Trying to sell foreign exchange to retirees and take their money. It was a soul-crushing experience. And, from there, it was good to know what you don't want to do in life. Sure. Not only was it a terrible job, but I was also bad at it, which was like doubly depressing. So, after that, I did not have a really fulfilling career in my 20s. I actually felt, a big sense of letdown when I moved to New York. I had these big plans, and none of it seemed to be working out. I started a blog early, right when Tumblr started. And as you said, I ended up a few years later being one of the most followed people on the platform in a very early, I caveat by saying this is a really early part of the internet. The internet was a really small, weird place back then. But it opened up a lot of incredible doors. And it was kind of the first thing in my professional career that was really working and was really going well. And all of a sudden, people who I really looked up to were interested in what I had to say, wanted to know what I was doing. And I gained entry to a world that was, much more interesting than one that I had been in the early part of my career.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome, man.
Yeah. And so, as you said, like I was mostly going around in my blog, like just taking photos. I had my camera around and I wanted to shoot for brands.
You're like an Instagram influencer before Instagram.
Exactly.
Taking pictures and put them up on Tumblr.
Just taking, and people forget how weird that was. Like, normal people did not put photos on the internet every day. That, like, I was relentlessly made fun of by my friends. If there was another person on the internet, like, who was coming to New York, I would just be like, oh, stay on my couch. Like, people would just come because they also had a blog. I would just let them sleep at my house. That's how, like, small the internet was. But wow. I managed to get a following there, and this was right when brands started to pay attention to what people were doing on the internet. And so I was able to leverage that into shooting for Oscar de la Renta. And, that opportunity kind of, totally validated what I was doing. And at the time, Oscar was one of the only traditional fashion houses that was that had social media. And so, a lot of brands that were more innovative from a digital standpoint looked at what Oscar was doing. And so that just, I started getting all of these brands reaching out to me. And, and I, from that experience, started to feel like there was a business here and that brands were going to want to work with people like me and like my friends. And to do that in any kind of larger way, they were going to have data that they could trust. And so I found out that we could connect to the APIs of Tumblr and Instagram and Google Analytics, and I could pull data directly from those platforms. And I said, this is a business. We can turn this into a new kind of advertising. I was, 26, 27, and started it.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. I love that story. So two things I want to just touch base on in your bio. So the cold calling at the finance company,
Yeah.
I feel like, behind every great founder or every great business development person is a shitty cold calling job.
Yes.
Did you take anything away from that? Because at the end of the day, sales is talking to people. And, I had a job where I had to call 100 attorneys every single day, and then maybe break through to 10 and get one to take information. And as much as that was a really hard job, and I did it at the exact same time you did in 2008 when, the world was imploding and nobody wanted to invest money really in anything back then. I wonder if you took anything from that experience and was able to, mold it into something that you took in the future.
I mean, like you said, I think anyone who's done sales at that, like that, you certainly learned, you learn that no is not that big of a deal. You learn to take those no's and move on. I think for me, the enduring lesson was that bad jobs are like diseases that eat away at you. Yeah. And I hated that job. And I hated myself for going to work every day in that job. And then I would go out with my friends at night and I would complain about that job. And then I would lay down after that and say, Jesus, I'm just sitting around complaining about this job. It was just, I was, hell-bent on not having that be the rest of my life and making sure that I was doing something with my life that was fulfilling and interesting. And so for me, having a job I hated so much in the beginning of my career, I think really focused me on trying to find my path out of that and make sure I never had to do it again.
I love that. I think that's probably, with 25% unemployment with kids coming out of school right now, and everybody, loading up on these degrees that they thought were going to, waltz them into an amazing opportunity and a great career. I think, there's some advice there on potentially taking something, just to get your foot in the door and start working. Mm-hmm. And really, if anything, to motivate you on the side hustle and put those extra reps and those extra hours into the thing that you do love and the thing that you can eventually monetize if you spend enough time grinding on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, it was never the other jobs. You say side hustle, and I had 10 businesses before Fohr. None of them were very good ideas. I had a record label. I had a tie company. I had a web development company. I had a cycling apparel company. What else did I do? I had a photography magazine I put out. And so I was always saving up 10 or 15 grand and then putting it into some venture, which you mentioned reps, and it gave me those reps to learn how to put something out there and have it fail, which was, a good lesson. Learn the things I didn't want to do. I knew I didn't want to be in apparel and make things. I had one artist in my record label, and I realized I did not want to manage artists. And it also like it gave me a sense that when I had the idea for Fohr, that I knew it was much bigger, a much better idea, and like a much more serious idea than the ones I'd had before. And I don't know if if I hadn't been constantly searching for that, that exit ramp into something more interesting, that I would have recognized the idea, and that Fohr was something that I should put a little bit more weight behind. All those other ideas, I just put, whatever I emptied my savings account. But when we came to starting Fohr, realized like once the savings account were gone, that we had to go out and raise money because this, there was something here that was worth quitting the jobs and really like going all in on.
I love that. I also wanted to touch on the idea of like the early days of high fashion photography, and when the trend at least started opening up the door to the idea of a photographer who wasn't maybe traditionally trained, who didn't come up through the art department at these fashion houses and these magazines. When did you start seeing the door crack open for photographers that didn't just bring an artistic style and a point of view, but also brought an audience along with them?
Yeah. I'd say 2010, 2011. And some of these brands, Tumblr had a big push to get fashion brands onto Tumblr. And those brands needed content. And so they started working with some of the bigger Tumblr creators. And, those early opportunities, which I was, fortunate enough to be a part of, some of the people that got those, it was such a cheat code. I mean, I was getting jobs and I was getting access to things that I didn't even know existed. And I can remember shooting my first show for Oscar, and the mostly men that shoot fashion photography during New York Fashion Week, they are like, grizzled. They're doing 15 shows a day. I had no idea what I was doing. I remember I had like my elbow was out a little too much. This guy's behind me like, "Hey asshole, move your elbow." And I'm like, it's so intimidating. And you're in this like huge pit of people that like, this is what they do. And I was like, I have a blog. I have never been paid to take a photograph in my life. I ultimately don't really, they had these huge lenses. I have like one camera with one little lens on it, no flash. And, but I took a photo in that first show that is still one of the best things I've ever taken. And
wow.
I took that photo though, and I was like, fuck yeah. Like I saw the other photos that all those pros took, and I took the best photo of that show. And so it was this moment of like, even though I was feeling like, totally out of my depth, had no idea what I was doing. And I had these kind of established people that were like actually quite hostile towards me. I ended up like, being able to produce something that I felt like I also belong. I belong here. But it was through that I did start to realize like, oh, right. I started to see the models that the brands were casting had followings. I met Carly Kloss was coming up then, and she was traditionally like very established. She went the traditional route, but she also posted on social. And so they started to, the models that were on social started getting, walking these shows more. And it was like, I could just start to see like, a following was a currency, and that, you could hire, for traditional roles. And early on, I thought like the reason I wanted the following was it was going to give me access to these more traditional jobs or opportunities that I wanted. Not that it could be a job in itself, but that like, yeah, if you're a film director with 1 million followers or a film director with no followers, you're going to get more opportunity if you have 1 million followers. And that is borne out to be true. But that was like I think the beginnings of of me realizing like there's an industry here potentially.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting, the idea of social media followings or social media in general being this universal currency that has kind of destroyed typical gatekeeping models, whether it's the music industry or TV and film or stand-up comedy or modeling and acting, or in your case, being a high fashion photographer on the runway. I just love to hear those stories. And I think it's great. I mean, especially to be at the beginning of it. Now it's just so standard common practice, like we would never bat an eye. But, when you're the first doing this thing and disrupting a model, and there's a lot of, traditional folks who are like, who are these guys that are kind of, they feel threatened and, they don't think you're part of the club. You haven't, put in the time and,
Exactly.
It's so interesting. Yep. All right. So, you are able to claim being one of the first influencer marketing agencies going back to 2012. And now we flash forward today, where a recent ANA brand survey put out to marketers is saying that a lot of CMOs are allocating 50% of their budget or more to influencer marketing now. How wild has it been to be in the industry for over 13 years and see it at the nascent beginning and where it is today? And I'm sure a lot's changed, but are there a couple of, key things that you can point out to of how it's changed from the beginning to now?
Yeah. First of all, it's been insane. There's this, it's been insane. There's this Keith Richards quote I love from his great autobiography. And he says, this person's asking him like, you're the Rolling Stone. Like, did you ever think like when you guys were just kids playing music that like you would end up being this big, And he's, they're like, could you have dreamt it? He's like, I dreamt it every day. I just never thought it would happen. And like, if I can go back to, talking to my co-founder before we started this business, of course we dreamed of a world where, where being a creator was going to be this commonplace and where it was going to dominate advertising. Did I legitimately think it was going to happen? Like, I mean, it was so far away. And I think, we were so early that, in the first 3 or 4 years of having this company, a big part of my job was just advocating for influencer as an industry and trying to, legitimize it and teach it to people and explain it to them. Some of the big things that have shifted early on, obviously Instagram as a platform changed things quite dramatically. I think a big shift when early blogs were very focused on your art, your expertise, your writing, like your output. And so your blog was very much like, look what I made. I posted photos on my Tumblr every day, very rarely of myself, because that just wasn't what people did. And so the first big shift was from like, look what I made to look at me. And all of a sudden the content of social media became documenting yourself, documenting your life. And not just that, but you as the main character of that, and photos of yourself every day. And so that was a big shift early on in the platform. Obviously, a seismic change was photo and caption to video. I come from the photo and caption world. That is, and so there's a lot of the people that ended up being the biggest creators and influencers when videos started coming, they had never done a video. They never spoken to their audience. And it's a really different thing to be able to write and take photos than it is to be engaging on video. And so that's just been, that's changed everything. Obviously, the algorithms have completely upended the way that we operate. And I think we'll probably talk a bit about that later. And one of the things that's surprising though, and the reason that, we're pushing these new products out and we're having the conversations we are right now is while the industry has changed so much, the way that brands approach it has not changed that much.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's still pricing on follower count. It's still, do I personally just like this person's content? Do I think they're interesting? Total like vibes based casting. And so like, you know, I sometimes will see like clients making $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 decisions in the ways that you would expect them to have made that decision 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, the tactics have not changed pace as quickly as the industry has.
Yeah, it's funny how many marketers choose a creator because they want to get the behind the scenes selfie to send to their kids, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I love it.
Absolutely.
So, the other thing that's been interesting is not just the emergence of new platforms and the migration of platforms from follower count and photos to short form and vertical video, but then you also had, platforms kind of, fall out of relevancy or even disappear. So, I don't know, some would maybe say that Pinterest is no longer a viable creator network. Snapchat has gone through different iterations of trying to be a creator network. Tumblr, I can't vouch for how relevant it is or isn't anymore.
Not.
Dead.
It's
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
Vine gone.
Yeah.
So as a creator who, once was the king of Tumblr, how detrimental or how does that impact you as a creator when a platform becomes devalued or disappears, and then you've got to go migrate to greener pastures if you want to keep relevancy and keep building?
It's a difficult reality. And I think one of the paradoxes of the influencer space growing is that while the industry continues to grow, and while you look at the next 5 years and it looks pretty bright for the creator industry, it gets harder every single day for the individual creator to build a lasting career. It used to be 15 years ago, you built a blog, you had traffic, people typed your website in every day and went to it to see what was on there, and there was no algorithm, and there was no, you didn't have to, fit into the trends and all these things. And, I see creators all the time that 2 years ago were, doing great. The posts were doing great. They were getting all the brand deals, all of this. And it all kind of can fall apart really quickly. And so, while we have had, Instagram has been dominant for so long, and TikTok now for years as well. Like, there isn't as much platform migration, and there's not going to be. Those platforms are so big and so ingrained in culture now that usurping them is so much harder than it was. Tumblr, I don't know, maybe it had 50 million users. Instagram has over 1 billion, TikTok has over 1 billion. But what changes even faster now is the moods of these platforms. And because you are beholden to an algorithm that you don't understand and you don't control, you can lose access to the following that you built pretty quickly. And that makes it really difficult for creators. And I know they don't operate in like an enormous amount of psychological safety when it comes to their long-term opportunities for their career.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I know you always hear about folks that are advising like build an email list and build products and, capitalize on your ability to infiltrate the algorithm now because it's not guaranteed. And if you don't have lasting business models to sustain you past, your prime, so to speak, you're much like an NBA player who, has to retire early and then figure out what to do with the rest of their life. So,
yeah.
All right. I wanted to touch base on Sephora Squad, which I think is a very innovative early campaign where Sephora moved away from this idea of only working with, creators that had giant followings and instead started to move to this platform where they had this long-term, always-on stable of creators, fans, UGC creators, influencers, kind of, full gamut from very big people down to maybe, everyday fans that just had a few thousand followers, or were aspirational creators, or just loved doing, beauty hauls and sharing them with their immediate friends, much like my 10 and 12-year-old daughters, if you can believe that. Could you talk about, the early insight and how you kind of got Sephora to come on board with this idea of building out a squad? And I love that idea of, don't spend good money on fake love. That's a great,
Right.
that's a great tagline that, illustrates this idea of, the buzzword that I hate to say, but we have to say it sometimes, authenticity, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. So one, yes, like, why are we paying people that don't give a shit about our products to pretend to like them? That doesn't work. Like, the foundation of persuasion is passion, I believe. You're ever at a dinner party, you're sitting next to somebody that like is really into something that you couldn't care less about. At the end of that party, you're like so all in, and it's because like passion's contagious, and you can't, and it's not something it's easily faked. And so, when we were pitching Sephora for that business, another question I asked myself was just like, look, almost every other job in the world, you have to apply for it. The president has to apply for the job, why are we're going out to people, we're offering them tens of thousands of dollars. Well, first of all, if you start your email by saying, I'd like to give you $50,000. Oh, by the way, are you a fan of this brand? You're going to be like, I'm the biggest goddamn fan of this brand you've ever heard. I love this brand. So you don't know, right? So our first innovation there was like, we should make people apply. And part of that was we wanted to create a barrier to getting this deal. We said, if we are going to give you a full year ambassador contract with the dominant beauty brand in the space, you got to apply for it. Not only that, you have to tell your followers you're applying for it and get them to leave you testimonials. You got to get some skin in the game, So first year we had 15,000 people apply. We had 450,000 testimonials that got left for them. And what we didn't expect, I think, was just the incredible stories. The creators we picked, we would have never found them if we were looking in the traditional way. And part of it is like the internet is just way too big. And it's a mistake marketers, I think, make over and over. They underestimate the scale of the internet. And they also think that their internet is the internet. But you and I have totally different social experiences, right? Like
the algorithm is a view into one's soul.
Right. Yeah. And so, how can we expect to pick the best people for a brand if the way that we're finding them is we have to go out and find them? And so like just saying, hey, you can apply for this, was so transformative. We just did this again with Dick's. We just closed their applications on their program. They had 10,000 people apply for that, gold medalists, like incredible people talking about, when they were, in high school, like how important Dick's was, how, they didn't have a lot of money growing up, but like their mom would save up. They would go to Dick's at the beginning of the season and they would get new shoes and how, and so like for us, that you hear those stories and then they start doing sponsored content for it. And we get to actually weave those stories in. And it's just like, it's so much better, and, part of like, I think being on this earth is just like not filling it with crap filler, right? Like I want to add something of value to the world. And so like, if we're working with Dick's and we're going to give a partner this big contract, how about the person who feels like so much of their journey as an athlete is connected to this, and who feels like they have this incredible story about their mom's sacrifice growing up and to make sure that they had the equipment that they need, and how Dick's was a part of that. And so bringing that energy and going back to the dinner party, bringing that passion and that authenticity, the word that's much belabored, to that partnership. I mean, for us, it's just it's like a much more fun way to do it, and the results are just so much better. And I think once you start doing things that way, it kind of radicalizes you, and it's like, why aren't we doing this for everything? I mean, we try and start every casting that we do by doing an open call to our community and seeing who likes, who out there is interested in this brand. I mean, we just did this for the Real, and we had applications saying, hey, we have an opportunity coming up with the Real. And we had 600 applications in 20 minutes.
So good.
And so like, it's just such a nice way to start the process, instead of reaching out to people cold and being like, I have an opportunity, I'd like to see if you're interested.
Yeah, I love that. I remember when I was on the Adobe business, little microcosm of that, we had Tony Hawk on the phone in San Diego, and I was sitting in the boardroom with the clients, and Tony told a story about when he started Birdhouse Skateboards. He had a black and white MacBook computer, and he used to use Adobe Illustrator to drop in the colors for his ads. And he wouldn't, and then he would hit the button and it would have to render all night.
Yeah.
And then he wouldn't see the color ads until the magazine actually shipped to his house. And I watched all the clients just like melt. And like the minute we hit exit on the Zoom call, they're like, get this deal done. So good.
Yeah, it's powerful, right?
Oh man.
Yeah, I think it goes back to like, why? I mean, these contracts are huge now. I mean, we just a couple of weeks ago, we just paid someone $120,000 for one Instagram post. Like, let's make sure there's some juice behind it, right? If Tony Hawk is going to get on and tell a story about how Adobe is meaningful to him, we should expect that of our creators as well, that they have a real connection.
I love that. All right, so you're a podcaster too, Negronis ignored. Obviously I've got near in the podcasting section of the influencer world is near and dear to my heart, but how important has it been for you to launch a podcast? How has that added value to, both you professionally, but more importantly, for the business? We'd love to hear kind of the genesis and how it's been working for you.
So it was called Drinks with James. I would drink a whiskey and give advice about influencer marketing. There was no podcasts about it. And it was actually like, we did it on YouTube. This was kind of a little bit pre-podcast even. Then it's like 10 years of doing this or something, 500-600 episodes. And I think that, and most of them are just me. They're not interview. I just am like giving it, kind of advice of what I've seen in this week, whatever. And God, I think it is so interesting. And as you run a business and as it scales, you get further from the business. Your job becomes people a lot of time, in a lot of ways, right? And so for me to have to go on camera every week and have something interesting to say forced me to stay connected to the business. It forced me to articulate what I was thinking. I think this is like kind of, it reminds me a bit of like how stand-up comedians will go and test out material, and how like being on stage, and having that pressure, it puts your ideas through a more rigorous process to know if they're shit or if they're any good. And so for me, like just having to articulate what I think about something every week has been hugely important. It's also been nice to connect, and again, like the CEO job, especially when we got over 50 employees and up towards 100, like it becomes a lonelier, more detached job. and so I've enjoyed, having to make content and do the thing that, I learned I was good at 18 years ago when I started my blog, and kind of keep that part of my brain going.
I love it. Do you subscribe to this idea of the founder-led brands? It feels like brands that have a CEO that can really be a front of camera pitch man and be out there in social. I mean, obviously Gary Vee is a great example of
Mm-hmm.
one, and he's not the only one. You've got, a bunch, but
Yeah.
have you found that to be an important component of kind of the founder-led
Yeah.
brand and the marketing engine of Fohr?
Look, I think that any company, right? Like we now have the ability to choose to work, to support companies that we feel connected to. And so I think, for a founder to be more out front, it, especially in a services business, you can't walk into our store, you can't physically buy our product, right? And so it is a touch point that I think, hopefully people can connect to. Look, there's detractions as well, and if you upset your community, if you're going to catch the heat for it. And so I think that, like, it's been interesting as the business has scaled, also contending with the reality of why many CEOs don't do this. Because it's it makes the job harder in some ways, because now it's not just your audience watching, it's also your employees. And I think that's true about sharing your life in general. I share much less of my life now than I did 15 years ago, even though in so many ways it's more interesting. But I also feel that it can be harder to share it, So it's an interesting balance there.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so you're an avid cyclist. You've got your own team, Rapha Fohr, and tell me about cycling and how important it is to have that outlet, especially one that's tied to physical fitness and getting outside. How important is cycling to your mental health and maybe more important, your creativity and your opportunity to think things out, etc.?
I mean, I think it's hugely important. Being like just being away from a screen for a couple hours a day is really nice. And I am constantly pulling the bike over and dictating something into ChatGPT. I feel like I'm able to kind of like, you throw a bunch of data into your brain and then you just try not to think on the bike, and something, you come up with a solution. So that's been hugely important to me. And, cycling, I've always been interested in like more solo sports. I was a big wrestler in high school, and starved myself to the point of like losing 4 or 5 teeth. I'm still missing some of my teeth from malnutrition.
Wow, you're hardcore.
Yeah, and so cycling, like, there and bike racing is so hard. I find that the discipline to like do that hard thing makes the rest of the day a bit easier. And I also think that, like, for me, there's like a catharsis in just like hurting myself physically, before like exerting myself mentally, through the day. And so, yeah, bike racing has been amazing. It's also like, one of those sports that attracts like a bunch of weirdos that are like super type A. Like my team like is always like joking about the cycling Illuminati, because a lot of successful people are it's a sport that attracts obsessive like obsessive weirdos, I think. And so I've found a like community of people that I can really connect with.
You can vibe
And
with
it's
them.
like a
They're on
nice
your
look
wavelength.
at, they talk about like the male friendship, like the male loneliness epidemic. Um, Guys I ride with, like I spend like 8 to 10 hours a week just chatting to them, because on the bike, you're talking while you're riding. So I'm having 8 to 10 hours a week of conversations with like other men who I respect and admire. I'm hearing about their jobs, about their relationships, about their kids, about their fears, about their wins, their losses. We're like super involved in each other's like lives in that way. And I think it's been such a nice way to like continue to have a, like those friendships, when the rest of your life gets crazy and you don't want to go out drinking 5 nights a week. And I just had a baby 5 weeks ago, so
Oh,
it's been
congratulations.
really good for that. Thank you.
That's
It's been really
awesome,
good for
man.
that as well.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love that idea of like the solo sport in which you are the only one who can determine the outcome, but then also doing that solo sport within a community where other
Hmm.
people are trying to achieve that same solo outcome, and the obsessive nature. I did jujitsu growing
Oh
up as
yeah,
well, so can
jiu-jitsu
relate
is having a
to the
big
wrestling
moment.
stuff. Yeah, big time, big
I've
time.
been thinking about getting out on the mat actually,
Give
because
it a
I feel
try.
like some of it. I feel like some of the wrestling is like you could transfer it. It's transferable a
Oh
bit.
yeah, the guys that come in that were collegiate or high school wrestlers, they progress very fast, very
Yeah.
fast.
Okay. I'm gonna give it a try.
So how about the camera? Do you still spend time behind the camera?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Love
I
it.
always on me. So, I still love to shoot. When I started Fohr, I definitely had a decision of like, do I go professional photographer and that's what I do, or do I start a business? And I felt quite certain I could not be world class as a photographer. I thought I had a better chance of being world class on the business side. So I feel good about that decision. I don't have like the artist's mentality so much, but yeah, I still carry my camera every day. I still love to take pictures. I still feel like it's like such a gift I can give other people, being able to like, I take every employee at Fohr, I take their headshot still.
Mm,
And so I still love being able to do that and make sure everybody has a really nice photo of themselves where they look great and they feel confident. So I still enjoy it.
I love that. All right, so you've been vocal about the views per dollar, VPD, as a better metric
Hmm.
than ROI or impressions or engagement alone. Any other metrics that you're thinking about in the current influencer ecosystem, or is VPD still the standard that you feel is the winner?
I mean, for us, it's super important. Everything is downstream from views.
Mm,
Um, and, a lot of brands like to talk about bottom of the funnel and affiliate and all these things. Like, I mean, globally, affiliate sales account for 1% of retail. And so that's important. Affiliate's an important part of an influencer strategy, but it's 1% of sales. So what are you doing for
crazy.
the other 99%? And we're in an attention, like we are in a like absolute cage fight for attention. And so what we can control is like how many views can we get you per dollar? And you know, our goal is not to compete with other influencer platforms or agencies, but to compete with the platforms themselves. And so
Yeah.
you can get about 100 to 200 views per dollar when you go direct to Instagram or TikTok. And so our goal is to get there with influencer and to be able to take budgets away from Meta, not to win against another influencer agency in an RFP process, because like that's just like not what our goal is, but to actually be able to compete with those platforms. And so the VPD is a foundational metric for us. I think more broadly, it's understanding that our world is increasingly is controlled by machines. The algorithms are like controlling culture and taste. And sometimes it takes a machine to know a machine. And there's a certain amount of hubris that people think that they can understand these platforms and they know how to operate within them. But ultimately, we said, well, I think we need to build a machine that can talk to this other machine and help us understand it better. And applying the mathematical principles from the financial world to the creator space. And so, I'm humbled every day of, how annoyingly right the math can be. And this shift has been hard for us even. My team did not want to do that. When I came out and said, this is where we're going, there was not a parade. They were not excited about it. Because basically we're saying that we think that the math is going to lead this conversation. Our understanding of these platforms and of culture, like that absolutely matters. Creativity, all of those things really matter. But like the math is what is organizing this market. I mean, these algorithms it's an equation. And so it's been hard to get the team behind it. But after we ran a couple of these campaigns and they saw the results, everyone was like, okay, sure. Like, yep, you're right. The math is incredibly compelling. And so, we are increasingly, bringing on people who have worked in the financial markets, who are quants, and we're taking expertise from those like mathematically obsessed parts of the world and applying it to this market. And so we're going to continue to, I think, to bring new models and new things to market that are quite a bit different than the way people are doing them currently.
I love it. Well, look, we've made it 47 minutes without saying the word AI, but here we are.
Yes.
I think it's interesting. I think AI and the proliferance of data, it just gives you a wider pool of things to look at when you come up with the human insight, right? So you're not letting AI pick your influencers or design your creative or tell you what to do, but to some degree, you are looking at that mathematical equation and you're trying to do what we've always done, which is give yourself the best possible chance for earned media. And, if you now have these tools that can suck up and synthesize massive amounts of data in moments and seconds, why wouldn't you take advantage of that to come up with the human insight that then leads your creative strategy and your influencer selection strategy? So makes total sense to me. One thing you've discussed is the idea of AI agents versus human creators. We just had what is it, Claude Claw or whatever, unleashed on the world a couple of weeks ago, where AIs were creating social accounts on their own and building followings and doing things without their master's approval or direction. I recently heard a news creator that I follow most evenings talk about the idea that, he's putting out content, but then you've got 10,000 new news channels popping up every single day that are just taking headlines, feeding them through an LLM, and then having, good-looking girls or guys read the news, and it's just flooding the ecosystem with content. So, when you have 10,000 more channels a day pushing down the CPMs across platforms like YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, and making it so a creator pops up less often than AI generated content, that's a very, scary world to live in. And as a creator, what are you thinking about on the idea of AI creators versus human creators? And do you think we see a risk of AI creators, overtaking our favorite friends on the internet?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, one, for AI creators and AI content to overtake, a human-driven one, I think it says some pretty depressing things about the world, and I think it misunderstands what people want out of these platforms. And I just don't totally believe that people are going to spend 3 hours a day scrolling content made by machines. It's not real. I just don't believe that's worth anyone's time. And I just don't think they'll do it. And so I don't believe long term that a machine can replace humanity. That's what we're trying to connect with on these platforms. And so to become the most compelling content on the platform, it means it has to be better than like real, authentic, spontaneous humanity. And if that's true, we're fucked. Like it's over, So like, and honestly, that's just like not a platform I'm going to want to be a part of. Now, individuals using AI to create a universe that's compelling and interesting and creative and weird, I love that. Like, AI creators, like for me, if we work with an AI creator, we're not working with that creator, we're working with the person that controls it. And so if my like art, if my way of connecting with people and building community is through a digital avatar that I control, and I'm the one telling it what to do, and I'm the one putting it in these situations and creating the videos and photos, like, and I build a following and a community, to me, that's absolutely no different than paying an individual who's doing that, with their own content. And like, in some ways, it's not that different from the like conversation between like film photography and digital. It's not real. It's like, that's a tool, and it's a tool to people's creativity. I'm okay with it. Now, the bot farms spitting out like AI slop, again, like these models have been pretty good for years. And I don't think a majority or even a large percentage of the content I'm consuming is AI. And so the fact that it hasn't happened, I think it's just like people don't want it. Like, I saw something like Pinterest launched this thing where you could flip a switch and it would get rid of AI generated content in Pinterest. And somebody tweeted about it. It had like, 15 million views, and like everyone was like, thank God. Because nobody wants this stuff. Like, AI is so incredible. It's such a like transformative technology, but like nobody wants to consume this content. And ultimately, like, while these algorithms are machines, they are machines that are responding to the desires and whims of a billion people. And so, like, again, for that reality to become true, people have to decide they are willing to spend hours a day looking at fake content from people that don't exist. And I just don't think people will do that.
Do you think that's a case for a platform like Be Real, or maybe an emerging platform that vows to only allow real creators? Or will all the platforms, as they always do, just adapt this as a feature because the market demands it? And then all of a sudden you see TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram all have turn off AI buttons.
Right. Yeah, no, I don't think it's a new platform. I think, Instagram and increasingly TikTok, have created one of the marvels of business. I mean, those platforms are money printing machines, and so Instagram is not going to do anything to turn people off from consuming content on that platform. They might make it easier to make AI ads, certainly. But the last thing they want is people's time spent on Instagram to go from 3 hours to 2 hours and 30 minutes. Even that is like catastrophic,
Huge
And
red
so,
flag.
yeah. And so, I think if they find that people are less interested when they, are seeing all this fake content, then they're going to find out ways to get rid of it. And if not, and people like it more, once again, we're probably screwed, and it might be time for me to peace out.
I love it. So, you've also been a advocate for long-term creator relationships versus one-offs. In this world where we have moved from a follower-based, metric to a algorithmic-based metric, and now, what you need lots of at-bats versus just people with big followings. Do you think that still holds true? Is the long-term 1-year ambassador deal still better than a feed with 10,000 different individual micro creators or UGC creators over the period of a year?
Years ago I would have told you yes, and increasingly I'm saying no. I think the long-term relationships make sense for those core people that you feel like are just totally representative of your brand. You want them all over your Instagram. You want everyone on social to know that this person is associated with my brand. But the internet, again, it's just too big, and there's too many subcultures, and there's too many versions of the internet. You can't attack it with ambassador programs with 30 or 40 creators. You can't do it with just that. I still think they have a place as a foundational heartbeat of what you are doing, but it needs to, it also needs to expand beyond that. And increasingly where we're going with views per dollar and the way we're paying creators is, we're moving towards a place where we're not even saying how many posts you have to give us. We just say, you owe us 500,000 views. And, you have a 65% probability of giving us those 500,000 views in one post. But it could take you 2, or it could take you 3, but that's what you owe us. And so again, that's just where things have to go to. You can't. I saw a brand. I think they paid over $100,000 for a TikTok, big celebrity. It got 55,000 views. And this person's and this content for this celebrity generally did really well. This post just bombed, but they didn't get another shot at goal. And so, with the variability in these platforms, creators, who are looking for 5 or 6 figures for a single post, there has to be some accountability.
Yeah, I like where you're not necessarily putting people in the straight hey, you get paid for this amount of posts and it is what it is. But you're also not saying, hey, we're tying you to performance down to the sale. You're saying, hey, there's a happy medium. We're gonna agree to a medium metric, all the other platforms and things out there that you buy on the internet agree to, and you're gonna do the work. And hey, I always wondered about that, because we used to do some deals, for YouTubers where we would guarantee 1 million views, and then the creator would go and get 5 or 10. What do you think should happen on the reverse of that, where the creator massively overperforms the minimum guarantee? Should there be a bonus?
Bonuses.
Nice.
We pay bonuses.
Okay.
Yeah,
let's go.
Absolutely.
I love it.
And you can also unlock that. You can also unlock that bonus by just posting more.
Yeah.
If you do 4 posts and you get us 1 million views and we paid for half a million, you should get more money. Absolutely.
I love it.
And for us, it's we're looking at that probability distribution, right? And most most everyone's is a bell curve, right? And so we are saying, basically, we're paying for this middle 80%. And if it falls in the bottom 20%, you owe us. Let's like agree that like nobody wants one of your worst posts to be this post. So if it falls in that, you owe us. And if it falls in the top 20%, you should get more money. But like
that.
we're paying for this, like this middle most probable outcome. And I think I think it makes sense, because it also doesn't make sense to hold people to standards they're never going to hit. If I say, Dylan, you owe me 1 million views, and I look at the probability distribution in your posts and you get 10,000 a post, you're going to be like an indentured servant, basically. You'll be posting for me for the rest of your life. That's not going to work. So it needs to be reasonable. It needs to be like within bounds, But yeah, absolutely. If brands are pushing on the downside, like if they want creators to share in the downside of like, what if this doesn't work? You have to do a make good. There has to be an upside for the creators if it does really well.
I love that. That's awesome, man. Well, James, super fun conversation, man.
Absolutely.
Loved it. Really appreciate your time tonight. If folks want to follow along or learn more about the agency, where'd you like to send folks?
Yeah, go to our Instagram, Fohr.co. Go to Fohr.co online. Ask your favorite AI chatbot about us. Or you can look me up, James Nord, everywhere.
Love it. And for those of you who are watching at home, if this is the first time you're seeing the show, don't forget to give us a follow or a subscribe. If you're listening to the show, a honest review on whatever podcast platform you happen to be listening is a great way to support the show. And last but not least, if there's a creator out there who maybe wants to earn on the upside, if there is a brand marketer that wants to pay on a media metric and not some of these old antiquated models where you just get the posts and life is what it's like, or if there's just somebody out there who you think would enjoy the conversation that I had with James today, don't forget to share the show. And with that, James, I'll wish you a great night. Thanks for coming on, man.